Okay, so for the next two labs, what we're going to be working on is building a LAMP stack. And so for those of you who don't know what LAMP stands for, it stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and then traditionally the P stands for PHP, but a lot of people are using Python. Just like the M, we're not actually going to use MySQL, we're going to use Postgres. And so basically the M, I like to consider it as the model or the database. So that's kind of how we're going to interpret it, but we're going to call it the LAMP stack. Um, and so if you go to my website at db.tannercook.com, up here under CIT225, there is a LAMP stack with Flask, and that's where you can get to my instructions. Now, I wrote these as I went through all the steps, so what we're going to do is today we're kind of going to be testing these just a little bit. They should all work because I did them step by step, but hopefully as we go along with them today, it's all good because I'm actually going to walk you through it. And hopefully, we get to where we're up and running. So part one, so lab 13 is essentially part one, and there's three main steps. And then in each of these, there's kind of some more steps, but I tried to break it out into like manageable chunks. So hopefully that helps a bit. So we're going to start with the first step, which is getting Ubuntu server. And that shouldn't be 2004. That should be 1804. I must have been confused because 2004 comes out in April. I'm excited about it. But anyways, we're going to set up Ubuntu server in Virtualbox. So just so you know, I'm going to have these up. I'll slide them over as much as we need. But I am going to follow the steps from here. Up here at the top, it does have the downloads for Virtualbox as well as the download for Ubuntu server 1804, which is what we're going to use. Now, I've already got 1804 downloaded, so I am going to skip that step. So obviously, we already have the stuff downloaded, so we're going to dive right in, and we're going to click on Machine, and we're going to click on New. And just like we did with Fedora, if you use VirtualBox, we're kind of going to do the same thing, but we're going to do this one a little different. We're going to call it Ubuntu Server 1804. And it should automatically detect Linux Ubuntu just from what we put there in the name, which is where we want it. So we want to make sure that we are showing right there. So on the next screen, we want to choose how much RAM we give our machine. Now, honestly, we can survive on 1 gig pretty readily on our little server here. But if you have enough RAM, I would say give it some more. So I have 32 gigs in my machine, so I'm going to give it 2 gigs because it's no problem at all. So 2048 megabytes are 2 gigs there. And then we hit next. And now we're going to choose how much storage we want to give our device. And it says the recommended size of the hard disk is at least 10 gigs. But for right now, we're going to create a virtual hard disk. So we're going to say create. And we are going to choose our hard disk type. And you can just leave it the default of a VirtualBox disk image. And I am going to do mine dynamically allocated, which all that means is like if I say 15 gigabytes is what I want to give it, but it's only using 10, then I'm not using 15 gigabytes on my actual hard drive. It's only using the 10. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And I'm going to give it 15 gigs. So you can give it whatever you want. It needs to be more than 10, but I'm just going to give mine 15 just so there's some wiggle room there. 10 should be fine, though, if that's all you have. So we're going to say create. And now what we just did, so now that it's done, this is kind of just the wrapper, essentially, right? It's just the wrapper. So we actually don't have anything actually in there as far as the operating system. That's what we need to do next. We just kind of built the container for it. So what we need to do now is we need to right-click this and hit settings, or you can hit the settings button up there. And what we need to do is click on the storage tab, and then we're going to click on the little CD here under controller IDE, and we're going to click on this little CD next to this drop-down menu. and we're going to say choose a virtual optical disk file, and that will let you browse to your file that you have downloaded, your 1804 server. Now, mine's already right here, so I'm just going to click on it, which I just downloaded. Normally, you just go to your downloads folder, click on it there. So we're going to select it there, and then we're also going to check this little box that says live CD/DVD. And then the other thing we're going to do is we are going to go down to network, and we are going to change this from NAT to bridged adapter. And what that's going to let us do is it's going to let us, it's going to act like it's a machine sitting on your network. So it's like having another computer on your desk, essentially, as far as the network is concerned. So it's going to get its own IP address and all that kind of stuff, which is what we want because we're going to use this as a web server on your local network. So we're actually going to load a web page from it. So once we change that, then we're good to go, and we can hit OK to save our settings. And once we do that, we are ready to install Ubuntu server. So as soon as we hit start here, it's going to pop open our terminal window, and you should see a boot. And this is just like booting off a USB stick, except for we have a virtual disk that we're using. So it's going to boot here for a minute off our ISO that we downloaded. And then from there, we will be able to install. And there we go. Now this should be pretty self-explanatory to walk through this, but we're gonna do it real quick. So obviously we're using the English language, and then I would recommend hitting update to newer installer. It's only takes just a few seconds, and if you don't do it, it's not going to be the end of things, but it's just nice to have the latest and greatest. It's going to automatically detect our keyboard input English US. If you're using something different and it doesn't detect it, maybe change that to what you need. And then you'll notice here that it's giving it an IP address here. So in this case, on my network, because my network is 10.0.0.0, it's got the IP address of 10.0.0.60. So that's good. You want to make sure you have an address there. And you can even take note of that if you want, but we can find it later. So we're just going to hit done on that. And then on our proxy address, we're going to skip. So we're going to hit done. And we're going to leave that default. So we're going to hit done. And so now we're here on where we choose how we want to install this. And so we are going to say to use the entire disk. And I forgot to mention that on these screens, you actually don't have a mouse. You have to use your arrow keys. So make sure you use your arrow keys and then the enter key when you're ready. So we can hit done there, and this is just asking you to confirm. And so we're going to say done, then it double checks, because if this was a real life machine, we would be erasing whatever's on the disk. So you can just arrow down to continue, and it's going to be red just to warn you, but that's what we're going to do. Now we got to choose what we want for our server information to log in. So I'm just going to type my name, and you can do your thing. I'm going to call this dev. You can use your name. Server name can be dev. And then for the username, just put, your first name, last name, or whatever name you want there. And then I'm just going to pick a password here. One, hopefully, that I can type accurately. And then you should be good. On this step, this is an important step if you want to connect to it without using this little window here, which I'll show you here in a minute. If you're using a Mac, or if you're want to install PuTTY on Windows, or if you're using Linux, you can just connect straight to it from Linux. But OpenSSH server will allow us to connect to this computer from another one. So in this case, I'm going to connect to it from my host computer. So I'm going to hit spacebar on that to enable it, and leave the rest default. This is where you can install additional software, which we are going to skip for now. So we're just going to hit done. Then as soon as we hit done, it's going to start installing. So it's going to run through all of its stuff, install it all, and then we should be good to go as far as having it all installed. Let me scroll down to where we're at in the instructions here. And we wait. It shouldn't take too long. I am going to let it do its security updates while we're sitting here. Does anyone have any questions so far while we're kind of in this wait here? All right, seems awfully quiet. I guess while we're sitting here, what's nice about Linux is how easy it is to develop on, not only on the desktop, but on server, because what we're doing in this window is a server, and you'll see that we won't have any graphical user interface with it. So no buttons, no mouse support, nothing like that. But one of the main reasons that I use Linux as my main desktop, like what you see here, is because it's so easy to work with Linux servers, which is what most things are on. So that's kind of why I do it. And so you'll actually see here in a minute that I can just open up my terminal here and connect straight to this. Mac should be able to as well. Windows, though, unless you install the Windows subsystem for Linux, if you install the subsystem, then you can use the Ubuntu terminal. Otherwise, you have to get something like PuTTY or something like that to be able to remote into your server here. And hopefully, this doesn't take too long.
Okay, I'll ask a question.
Okay.
So you mentioned in the initial announcement that this was kind of like doing a mini full stack project.
Yep.
For those of us that are lighter on the programming languages, how worried do I need to be, I guess is my question.
You don't need to be worried about all, because honestly, we're the only thing, everything will pretty much be given to you except for the database stuff. And even then, it's going to be pretty much pretty easy. I just want to do a real simple example. So like as far as all the Python stuff, I'm going to just give the code to you. So you don't need to worry too much about that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep.
So
All right. So now
I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So I have a Windows machine, and so this isn't going to work on my Windows machine?
Nope, it should work. And I'll show you the difference here in just a minute.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yep, no problem. Okay, so once it's done, it'll say reboot down there. And so we're going to just hit enter. And now there's one thing you'll notice that it says, please remove the installation medium, then press enter. So one thing that we need to do is come back into our VirtualBox window here, right click, go to settings. And we're going to right click and just go to close. And we're just going to power off this server. So this is just essentially like yanking the power plug out of the back, and it'll close the window. Because we need to take that disk out. So we're going to go back into storage under settings, go back to where we put that CD in. We're going to hit this little guy here, and we're going to say remove disk from virtual drive. And then you'll see that that says empty, and we're going to hit OK. Then we're going to start it again. And that's so it doesn't boot up and try to just reinstall over and over and over again. Because now that we've actually installed it, it's actually going to boot from its disk. And so it's actually going to be the server. So you'll notice that it already looks a little bit different as it boots up. And it looks a lot more scary than what it is. But anyways, like we were just talking about, the big difference between what you'll see on, per se, Linux or Mac and Windows is on Windows, you might just have to do your work from here. So in this little terminal window, which is fine. So you can log in and do everything here. So I'm going to use my username, type in my password, and I'm logged in. And so then you can just continue like we're going to do. But I'm going to open up my own terminal, mainly because it's easier to read. I'm going to open up my own terminal, and I'm going to connect to this other machine from here. And just so you know, this would work remote across the internet. So I have a server in San Francisco I connect to all the time, and it's the same thing. So I'm going to do SSH and then my username. So then I'm going to do Tanner Crook at, just like kind of like an email address. And then I'm going to punch in the IP address of this server. Now, if you remember right, I saw that mine was 10.0.0.60. And as soon as you log in, it should we should be able to pull what our IP address is as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in IP space address once we're logged in here, and we can get it this way too. And you'll notice that that second line down, number 2 item there, it says inet 10.0.0.60. So if you ever forget what your IP address is of your server, or it might change, you can always just type in IP space address and get it. So in this case, we're going to come back here, do 10.0.0.60, and hit enter. And it's saying, oh, you know, your fingerprint is this. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? I just type in yes, type in my password, and I'm connected on the same machine. So then I can kind of just tuck these windows away and just work on this one because it's running on the same thing. All right, everybody good up to this point? Nothing too crazy.
I have a question. How do we get that Windows interface?
Oh, what do you mean by interface?
You said that if we want to do this type of thing on Windows, we'd have to get a separate Windows interface or something like that?
Yeah, just a separate app. You have to get something like Putty is a big one. Putty is an SSH client. And then there's also, if you look in the Microsoft store, there's one called Ubuntu. And that Ubuntu will actually give you a little Linux computer on Windows. So then you could do this in that little window that it gives you. Essentially, when you install that Ubuntu app from the Microsoft store, you're just getting a terminal just like this one.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And just so you know, once you get to this point, you're all good. And like I said, if you don't want to, you can do everything right from this window. You can do it right in the Virtualbox machine window. I'm just not, I'm used to using my own terminal, so I'm used to the color scheme, because you'll notice this is all just white. It makes it a little bit harder to read. But if you want to, it's just, if you're on Windows and don't want to worry about installing something else, or for whatever reason, you can just use this window right here. We can run all of our commands right from this window if you want. And once we're done here, you'll notice this is the end of the instructions. So once you get to this point, you're actually done with step 1, which is we just have our server up and running. And then step 2 is we're going to start installing some stuff. So that's what we're going to do now. So up in the resources here, and I know this ebook's already listed on our stuff, but the Linux command line is a great free ebook, because I don't try to spend too much time explaining what every Linux command does. I'm hoping that we already have some of that, and as well, I hope that you can kind of infer from what we're doing here. So just know that I don't explain too much about the commands, but they should all work. So I'm going to follow step by step through this and double check my instructions. But this is kind of where I explain what we're installing, and then we're going to go through it one by one. So the first thing first is Apache, and Apache is our web server. So anytime you go to a website, odds are you're on an Apache web server, because that's probably the most common. It's great, that and Tomcat. But Apache is super simple. It's easy to install. It's easy to configure. So we're going to use Apache. It's a great piece of software. So in step 1, we installed Linux. That's the L of the lamp. And now we're going to install the A, which is Apache. Now, installing Apache, well, the way that software works in Linux is everything comes from a repository. And a repository is a big, giant database of where software is, like just URLs, really. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to update our server's repository, and then we want to upgrade the software on our server. So the way we do that is we do sudo apt update. and it's going to ask you for your password. And when you type your password, just like on the Fedora image, it's not going to show you typing anything, but it is working. So just type your password and hit enter, and it should go. And what this does is it just says, okay, I got all the newest information, and you have 24 packages that can be upgraded. So we say, great, let's upgrade them. And this is where Linux is so much better than Windows. We get to choose when we want to upgrade our system. It's not like when we go to power it off, it says, oh, shut down and update. We get to choose. So we're going to say sudo apt upgrade, and we're going to say yes, and it's going to tell us everything that it's upgrading. It's going to do it. It does it incredibly quick. And just so you know, this isn't just the operating system. This is how you'll upgrade all your software. So as we install things, they will upgrade with everything else. It's really pretty cool. And there we go. So now we're all updated. So now we're ready to install Apache. So to install Apache, normally I think those who aren't familiar with Linux expect to go to some website, download some file, and all that. Well, with Linux, it's super easy. So we're going to just say sudo apt install Apache 2 and hit enter. It's going to ask us, are we sure we want to do this? And we say yes. And it does it, installs it. And it's done. Right, so pretty easy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure this worked. Now, I mean, I know it worked, but just to show you what we just did, I'm going to open up a new window of Firefox here on my host computer, right? So if you're on Windows, you can open up Microsoft Edge or Chrome or whatever it is you use. And I'm going to go to the IP address of my server. So 10.0.0.60, right? That was my server. And I get this Apache 2 Ubuntu default page, and that means that it worked. This is our website, right? This is you could host your own website from here. You could just go and edit the HTML and create a static website if you wanted, which is kind of what we're going to do, but we're going to do it a lot cooler. But just so you know, if you get this page, you're up and working. All right, so I'm going to close this for now. And just like that, we have Apache ready to go. So the next part of our LAMP stack is the M, which model MySQL, but we're going to use Postgres. So to install Postgres, what we do is we do sudo apt install PostgreSQL. And we get one more package called PostgreSQL contrib because we are going to be doing some development stuff. And just so you know, don't worry about writing all this down because it is all right here. And that's, I'm going line by line because I'm using this to test my instructions. All right, and just like that, Postgres is installed and running. So it's super easy. And the last piece that we need, the P, so PHP or Python. And we are going to use Python. And in Ubuntu server, Python is already installed. But you can check if we do sudo apt install Python 3. That's how you would install it normally. And it is already installed. But we do want to get a couple other things Python related while we're here. So we're going to get a couple others. So we're going to say sudo apt install Python 3-venv. And we'll talk about what this does later. But for now, we're just going to go on faith and we're just going to install it. And then the last thing we need is a little tool called pip. So we're going to install Python 3 pip. And if you've done any Python development, you're probably familiar with pip. But the beautiful thing is on Linux, it's just this easy to install. We don't have to change any path variables, anything like that. We can just sudo apt install name of the package. And it actually takes care of all the dependencies. So what you're seeing right now is it's going through and it did a bunch of dependencies. It's installing all this stuff that it needs. It automatically knows what it needs. Well, not automatically. We don't have to worry about it. It just kind of takes care of it for us. All right, and then once that stops, then we are good. Now, one little bonus thing. So we have our LAMP stack. We got Linux, which is our server. We have Apache. We have Postgres, which is our model or database. And then we have Python. Our last thing that we can do to kind of make this easier is I'm going to install FTP. I'm sure you guys have all used an FTP server, a file transfer protocol. It lets us use something like Filezilla to manipulate files on a remote computer. So that's what we're going to do. And you know, normally you think, oh wow, that's going to be really complicated. Sudo apt install vsftpd. And we have FTP going. And just to show you, we're going to open up Filezilla here. And we're going to say, we're going to connect to a new one. We're going to do a new site. We're going to call it local dev. I have a million of these things. And we're going to put in our IP address here, 0.0.60. And my user is Tanner Crook. And we're going to say, okay. Now we're going to connect to this, and we're going to just use the same password that we use on our server. And we're going to say allow in secure plain FTP. It's just on our local network, so we don't care. And we're connected. Here's all of our files on our server that we now have access to. So if you want to use FTP, feel free and go ahead. I'm going to do it all through terminal just in case people don't want to worry about setting all this up. But you can do it. All right, and once you're done with that, that is step 2. So you can see that it moves pretty quick, not too hard. And now for the last step, and this last step is probably the most fun because this is kind of where we're going to actually start putting things together a little bit. Because right now, you know, we kind of just have everything installed for the most part, but we haven't done any configuring. And we might have to install a few extra things as we go along because, you know, we might add dependencies in Python and stuff like that. So just so you know, there are some resources here. So there's this DigitalOcean guide. DigitalOcean has a lot of great guides. We're going to do it a little different than what they're doing, but after I wrote this, I did find this guide and I'm like, wow, that's pretty close to what we're doing. And so if you needed some additional explanation or something, maybe you just want to see it from a different angle, there is that guide. There's also Flask documentation. So we're going to talk a lot about Flask. Flask is kind of what our middleware is going to be. It's a web framework that runs on Python. So basically, Python is going to be our main little programming language for the web backend. And we're going to use that, and Flask is great for that. It's modular. It's pretty easy. It works great. And then there's this great book that I have a copy of, and I wanted to link it. It's a book called Flask Web Development with Flask. Let's actually. And you by no means have to buy this, but I just thought I would reference it in case you finish this and you're like, wow, that was awesome. Flask Web Development, you can get it on Humble Bundle for a great deal. That's where I got my copy. And I think I got it plus about 30 other books for $15 or something like that. So, you know, you can keep watch there. But anyways, we're going to jump into this. So the first thing we need to do is we need to build our Flask directory because Flask kind of has this little template that it likes to use, or, you know, it has kind of a built-in way of doing things. And it's going to be basically where we store all of our materials to actually run our website. So that's kind of what we're going to do now. So with Apache, everything is stored under var www. So to change to that directory, we're going to do cd space var www. And then we can use an ls to see what's in here. And you'll notice that there's this HTML file. And if we actually were to go into that, this index.html, this is actually what's being loaded when we go to our server's current website. So if you wanted just to edit this and see what it does, you could do that. But that's not what we're going to do. So we're going to make sure we're in var www, and we're going to create a new directory. So we're going to say sudo make directory, and we're going to just call it app. So now you'll see that app directory there. And now what we're going to do is we are going to change the owner of this directory. We're going to say sudo chown, and I'm actually going to put my name or my user and then the group www data, and that's so the web server has access to it. And we're going to say app. Now I go into app, and now we're here. So this is kind of going to be our base directory where we put stuff, but we don't really want everything in here to be public. So we're actually going to create another directory. So make dir, and we're going to call it app. So there's our other app. So it's going to be really app. Let's go in there. So if I do pwd, you can see that it goes var www app. And that's because the first app is kind of going to be our private little container, and then the second one is going to be what is available to the public, essentially. And not that they'll be able to see the files, but it's stuff that the web server will have access to. So for security reasons, we're going to kind of separate some things. Okay, so now we're going to build our Flask structure. We're going to do this with one command. So we're going to say make dir -p, and we're going to type in models space static / styles, because we're going to build 2 of those, and templates. And now if I do ls, you'll notice that we have all of our directories. And then we need to build one more file. We're going to call it app.py. So we're going to type touch to build our file, and then app.py. And then we should see this. So now if we were to do a tree, let's install that. If we were to do a tree command here, we can see all of our files here. All right, so that is the basic file structure that we're going to kind of use for our little application here. So now we actually want to build our application. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to edit that app.py. So a .py file is Python. So this is kind of where we're going to put like our initialization type stuff, to where it's going to kind of be the base of our application. So we can edit this in command line if we do nano app.py, and it'll bring open this little editor, okay? And it's a little tricky. So this little caret down here, that means control. So if I wanted to save this, I would type control O, and it's going to say what file name to write. I'm going to leave it, so I'm just going to hit return. Now I didn't make any changes, so it says wrote 0 lines. And then if I want to quit, control X. Right. Okay. Now, like I said, like I promised, I give you pretty much all the Python code, because I do not expect you to write Python. So here is the Python that you're going to use to get us started. So I'm going to take and copy this. Now, when you paste in a terminal, you have to right click and then hit paste, or control shift V. We're going to put that in there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this to my name. I'm going to say hello Tanner, if you want, or you can leave it hello world, up to you. And then I'm going to do control O, return, control X. And then I saved that file. So now that file actually has something in it. All right, now we have the kind of structure of our Flask built. We built the initial Python file that's going to get us started. And now what we need to do is, we have Python installed on our system, but what if we wanted to have 3 different web apps running on our web server? Well, to save ourselves from having conflicts, because let's say I installed Python package for one server, and then I installed a Python package for another server, but they had to be different versions, or one conflicted with the other. So what we do is we build a virtual environment for Python to run in. So that's what we're going to do right now. So we're going to type in Python 3 -m. We're going to do venv. That's a hard word to say. And that stands for virtual environment. We're going to hit return. And then when we look in here, we'll have this new little folder called venv, which is our virtual environment. Now to activate this, we're going to type in source, and then we're going to type in venv bin activate. And as soon as we do that, you'll notice we get this over here, and that means that we are working inside this little container. And so then we can do stuff like pip3 install wheel. And we basically we're installing Python packages in here. So we're going to install wheel, which is kind of utility package, but then the important one is we're going to get Flask. Oh, I guess I ought to put install, huh? We're going to install Flask. That's the big one. We want to make sure we have that. So then we have Flask. All right, and just like that, we have kind of Flask ready to go as far as the Python is concerned. But now what we need to do is we need to connect our Apache to this. And to do that, we're going to use a thing called WSGI. It's a WSGI server. So basically what's going to happen is Apache, when you go to 10.0.0.60, Apache is going to take that and say, oh, okay, you want me, so I'm going to forward you to this application, and then it's going to kind of handle it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of build this little middle layer so it can handle a lot of this. So the first thing we need to do is set up our config file for WSGI. So we're going to go back one directory. So we're in our var ww app directory. And then we are going to create a new file, and we're going to call it app.wsgi. WSGI, short for WSGI. And then we are going to edit this file the same way we did the other one. So we're going to say nano app.wsgi. And just like I said before, we're going to take and we're going to copy this stuff right here. Now you'll notice in here that we have this application.secret key. Now this is normally something you never want to give away publicly, but obviously because we're testing here, I'm not going to use this ever privately. And this is just generated from a random string. You can use a Python package to generate this, and I have a link to how to generate that in the instructions. But for right now, you don't need to worry about it too much. So we're going to paste that in there. And this, basically all this is doing is it's saying, kind of pointing it where to go. So we're going to Control-O, Control-X to save that and exit. And then we're going to make a few adjustments to our files. So this is, we want to make sure all of our permissions are set because, for example, if I check the permissions of app.wsgi, you'll notice that I am the owner and my group is the owner, which means that the web server won't have access to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the web server access. And we're going to do that by saying sudo change owner recursively, meaning change it for everything in there. And I'm going to make myself the owner. You type in your own username. And we're going to make www.data the group owner. And we are going to do it for var www app. Now we're going to change one more permission, sudo chmod. We're going to change the actual permission because we changed the owner in the group, but now we're going to change it so the owner can read, write, execute. The group can read, write, execute, and everyone else can read it. A var www app. So now all of our files should be owned by your user in the www.data group. All right, so now we need to install one more thing, and that we need to install WSGI. So let's go sudo apt install lib apache 2 mod WSGI for Py3. All right, and then we want to make sure that we enable it in Apache, and we do that with sudo a2 nmod whiskey. It says it's already enabled, which is great. When we installed it, it did it automatically. And now what we need to do is we need to configure Apache to point to our new file. So we're going to do that in the Apache config. So we're going to say sudo nano, just like we did before. We're going to go to etc Apache 2, sites available, and we're going to edit a file there called 000-default.conf. This is the default virtual host. And so you'll notice this is kind of the default one that we have. And we are going to delete all this. And let me, because I just realized in my instructions, I think I forgot to save this. It looks like we may get to write it from scratch. Yep, looks like we're going to get to write this from scratch, which is great. It's going to be fun. Let me open up a new terminal here so we can see what we're going to do. I forgot to put this in the instructions, which is why we're doing this. Okay, so let me real quick SSH into my other server so I can see a good example. Let's see, Apache 2, sites available. Okay, so what we're going to put in here, and I'll make sure that this is copy and pasteable. But we're going to create a virtual host, and what this is going to do is it's going to basically say it's an entry for a website is essentially what this is. We're going to say that the server admin is, and you can put your own email address here. So I'm just going to put webmaster at local. Yeah, that'll work. And then what we're going to do is we're going to build our WSGI daemon process. This is basically going to tell the computer how it's going to use WSGI. So I'm going to put a comment here, and we're going to say WSGI daemon process. And then this is where we're going to call it what we want. So I'm going to call this app, and we're going to say the Python home is equal to, and this is where we put the path to our virtual Python. So var www app venv. Right, that's where we put that one. And then we tell it where our WSGI script alias is. We're going to say start a root, and we're going to go to var www app.wsgi. And then we're going to say process group is what we put right up here, which is app. So process group is equal to app. And the application group is equal to global. And then we're going to just build our directory stuff to tell it where to look for our files. If we have images and stuff like that, so we're going to say var www app. Order, allow, deny, allow from all. And then we're going to build our, and we'll talk a little bit about what this is going to do in the future ones. But by that point, we won't care because you don't really need to know all this stuff that's going on here. But this is to our static directory. which is where we will build our, that's like where we'll put our images and any, like our CSS. If we had any JavaScript, that's where that would go. And then we're going to put an entry to that like this. All right. And then we need to tell it where we want to put our errors. So we're going to say the error log is the Apache log directory / error.log. And we're going to make the log level warn. And then we're also going to build an access log so we can see who gets on our server. Apache log directory again. And we're going to hope that this works. So then we Control O to save it, Control X to exit. And I'll make sure that we get that in the instructions. And we're about to test this. So let's see. So now what we need to do is we should restart Apache. So we're going to say sudo service apache2 restart. Oh, and it looks like we have an issue. This is actually good, because if this comes up, we have a typo somewhere. So we're going to say sudo systemctl status Apache2. And it looks like I have a syntax error on line 9 of my config file. So let's go back and look, and it was on our allow order deny. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, maybe it's counting all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's see what we got going on here. So we say directory. I don't think it likes that space. Let's try that. And there we go. So we got no stuff. So that usually means it works. Let's check the status. So I'm just going to run that same command, but with status instead of restart. And it is active and running. So that means we're good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new window, and we are going to go to 10.0.0.60. And what do you know? We get hello Tanner, which is what we put in that Flask file. And so we are up and running. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, I know there's a lot that we didn't cover, but as far as, following the instructions, is there anything that anyone is too worried about? Or anything that you're curious about or anything like that? I know we kind of went really fast.
I'm not worried about it, but since I've never done anything like this before, I really have no idea what you did. I'm just going to have to go through it a few times and try to parse it out and figure out what is doing what.
Yeah, and we're going to talk. So as far as this goes, a lot of this stuff is kind of just basic. So kind of what I wanted to do is kind of set it up to where you could almost just mimic this over and over. Try to leave everything as basic as it comes, and then we're going to kind of add all this stuff in the next one. So as far as understanding it, you don't need to know too much. If you want to dive into it, you can research, the Apache config stuff. But for the most part, you can kind of just like, even I remember when I first started, it was kind of just like, oh, just get it working. So I just, copy some solution off Stack Overflow, and then I'd get started developing. And that's kind of what we're doing here is just, if you want to understand it, you can go for it. But if you want to just completely ignore it for right now, you can do that as well. But yeah, so once we get to this point, we are fully functioning. Now, I just real quick want to show you kind of a little bit more insight into how this is working. So if we're in our app folder, so now we can kind of just start working here. So I'm going to open up that app.py folder again. And you'll notice here that I have this app.route. So whenever we want to build a URL or a route, we kind of define it this way. And so our base index route is, we just return a string. This is hello Tanner. But we could also do something like this. We could say app.route, and let's call this one demo. So we're going to just build a URL, and we're going to say, give it a function, going to call it demo. And then we're going to say, we're just going to say something simple, and we're going to save this, exit, and then we're going to restart Apache. So you'll notice, because we didn't change the one, so this one still says hello Tanner, but now if I go /demo, now we're using that new route. And so we can kind of do all this stuff. So basically what we're going to do in a lab 14 in these future steps is we are going to connect Python to our database, and then we're going to build all this stuff so you can show your database stuff on here, or we're going to build a form so you can type in some information and have it saved to your database. And you can kind of see how that's going to work now, because basically what we'll do is we will just build an app.route, because this is all Python. So we can do all our Python code right inside here, have it do all the background work, from pulling the data from the database, doing any math calculations, anything like that. We can have it do it all and make it work. So, yeah, that's lab 13. If you can get to this point, you're golden, and you don't need to do this part. I was just showing you that. If you want to do it, that's great. But anyways, it's not too hard. The instructions were pretty good. I needed to make one little change to add our Apache config. Somehow I managed to leave that out, and then also I forgot to change one other thing. So I'm going to do that right after this. I already made some notes. So anyways, yeah, that's lab 13. And when you're done, you can just exit out of it. Like, so I'm going to, first of all, if we want to quit using our Python virtual environment, we can just say deactivate. And then I'm going to exit out of the SSH. And you'll notice that the connection to my server closed. Now, this is still running, though. So I would hope that we all know this, but in case you didn't know how the internet works, is, if I wanted to host a website, you have to have your computer running all the time. And then also you can set up your ports to where you can have the internet access your computer. So I actually have a computer sitting over behind me. It's a little Mac Mini actually that sits in here. And that actually is when you go to db.tannercook.com, you're actually hitting the computer at my house. So if you ever wanted to, you could actually run this virtual machine, or you could build your website on something like a Raspberry Pi, set up the port forwarding so it lets port 80 through to your computer, and you could host your own website. I know that for a lot of CIT majors, that's a requirement, is that you have website hosting. And if you really wanted to, if you have the capabilities to access your router, You know, I know many of you guys are online students or are you know, in your own house. You could, if you have access to your router, you could set up a $35 Raspberry Pi and have your own web server if you wanted. So lots of possibilities. That's kind of why I like to show you guys this stuff, because it is kind of fun. Now, Lab 13, we didn't get to dive too much into the actual stuff, but the overhead is a little bit. So I wanted to get it to this point, and I thought about just sending you an image, but walking through it is part of the lab technically with the LAMP stack. So I kind of wanted to just give you all the commands, let you walk through it so you could kind of say, you know, oh, I did it. And then also, if you ever apply for a job, you know, and hopefully you explore it a little bit more so you're a little bit more confident. But then you could, you know, talk about, how, you know, oh, I've set up my own Apache web server. You know, I installed Linux server, configured it. I set up Apache, I configured it. I set up Flask and WSGI, configured it, and I built my own little web application. People are going to like that on your resume or when you talk to them in interviews and stuff like that. So that's a big part of why I'm going to show you. And the other part is databases are kind of hard to get excited about versus something like web development, because in web development or, you know, web design, you kind of get to see the fruits of your labor immediately and it's exciting. But with database, you know, if you're just working with the database itself, it's like, yeah, woohoo, I stored my first name, last name. And so it's kind of fun to be able to build something that uses a database that's actually usable. So that's kind of what we're going to do. The instructions are almost done for part 2. And in part 2, you'll actually get to build your database. And then we're going to have all the code ready for you so you can kind of just plug in the files and it'll just start working and it'll use the database that you create. So it should be pretty fun. Does anyone have any questions? It looks like.
Yeah, I have one. So just to confirm, if we have a Windows machine and not a Mac, we just use the terminal to do the work if we don't want to set up PuTTY or whatever.
Yep. So, you know, we could just, we can just use this server. So I can, I can go cd var www app. You know, we can do it all just like we were doing right there. You know, we can nano app.wsgi.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions? All right, perfect. So I think what we're going to do the rest of the time is we are actually going to kind of go over our study guide. Kind of wanted to show you how I would go about studying and all that kind of stuff. Oh, wow. Earthquakes happening everywhere. You know, it's kind of funny. I actually, I live in Wyoming and I'm glad everything's okay there, by the way. The good news is that little tiny earthquakes like that are actually fantastic, because it means that you're not going to have a giant one, hopefully. And anyways, I live in Wyoming, so it's kind of like the one natural disaster besides, Yellowstone blowing up that is a danger here. And surprisingly, I've actually never felt one. I thought I felt one once, but I've actually always wanted to feel one. So I'm just a little bit jealous. I've lived here for quite a while and never felt one. Anyways, I'm going to shut down this server. So I'm going to say sudo power off. It's going to shut down that server. We are going to, and as soon as I shut down that server, we try to load the web page and we're going to get nothing. Okay, let's get our thing up. Oh, and someone asked a question. You said that we wanted screenshots to verify the work. If you want to take a screenshot of your name on that window, or just your window with hello world, and you're loaded up, that's good enough for me. You know, this is, these last two labs for me are more of, this is for your benefit kind of a thing, and I'm willing to give you points for it. So it's for your benefit because I really just want you to have fun doing it. So, you know, just as long as I have something to basically say, yep, they did it, that's good enough for me. So if you just want to take a screenshot of, like in that case, that little spot that just says hello world or hello your name, or you could even have it changed to say, you know, hey, I did lab 13. That'll work too. Just something. Okay, let me get this study guide pulled up here. All right, so for this study guide, and we're not going to kind of go over it too much. So here's kind of the main idea. So this week, what I kind of want to do is just talk to you about the layout of the study guide. And then next week in lab, next week, week 14, we will actually really go over the study guide. We'll talk about every definition for the most part. All the ones that aren't super self-explanatory, we'll kind of talk about. So, but I just kind of wanted to talk about the main idea of this. So there's two exams. One is the vocabulary exam and one is the query/statement exam. Okay, and these are open book, open note, pretty much open everything. So, you know that going in. So the vocabulary exam is a fill in the blank style exam, and you'll have to type in the word, and spelling does count. Okay, and for the most part, everything's going to be lowercase. It should tell you, but you'll type everything in lowercase, and it'll tell you how many words there are and stuff like that. So, so basically, it'll say like, what subquery is known as an expression only returns one column and one row. So then you could put that in there. Next week, we'll talk about this. So I'm not going to go over into what it actually is. I just kind of want to talk about format here for a minute. And then the next one is the query/statement exam. And this will actually show you a query or a statement. And then you'll have two questions. Does it work? Yes or no? And what does it return, or why does it fail? And so just so you know, the format of these questions is designed after the certification exams. So if you plan on taking a certification in the future, the reason they're like this is because this class was actually designed to prepare you for the certification test. So anyways, like on works yes or no, you would put 1 or 2, and then returns what or fails because you would choose the appropriate answer. So in this case, I would probably say that it returns first name, a white space, and last name from the contact table as a single string. I would put number 3 there. So I kind of give you 2 examples because you can kind of see the basic format. And there also will be some practice exams so you can go over a few questions. But what I would do before you start the practice exams is I would actually go through this, and I kind of try to give you terms and things to study, right? You should know what these are. You should know examples of these. And I kind of left it blank because I thought, you know, as I studied, if I gave you all these, you'd have to sit there and try to memorize them. But what's even better is if you write them down. That's kind of why I leave it blank. If you want a different, like a Word document version of this, just let me know. But like, so my favorite thing to do is I have an iPad or, you know, whatever you might use, whether it's Surface Book or if you just want to print it and write on it. But I think handwritten notes for me help me commit those things to memory for some reason. Like for my master's degree, I actually have all these written notes that I never used. Actually, I actually wrote them. But it was just the exercise of committing it to memory. So that's why I like to leave it blank. So, you know, DDL, what does it stand for? DML, what does it stand for? You know, and if it were me, I would just write what it means and any little hints that help me remember what that is. And I tried to do a pretty all-inclusive list. And like I said, I don't want to talk about it too much, what these actually are. I more just wanted to kind of go over. So maybe after you finish lab 13, you can start, you know, filling this in and working on studying. So, these basic terms, and then we have select statements. So, know all the stuff about a select statement, like what's in the select clause, the from clause, the where clause, the order by ascend, descend, what's the default. I kind of gave you some hints here as to maybe some specific questions. By default, does it order ascending or descending? Pro tip, it's ascending. The group by clause, the having clause, and then this is a big one. Know the order that select statements execute. And there is a fantastic resource. All this information can be either Googled, obviously, or found on McLaughlin's website. And if you don't know, you can actually Google search specific websites. So if you don't know how to do that, Google it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you can actually use Google to search a specific website, and that's tremendously helpful. But for that select statement, there's this great resource here, and it talks about the order in which things execute. So this is a nice little resource here. Okay, so as you're going through, I would just use this little right-hand menu, and I would look for what I'm looking for there. Just like with our DML and DDL, here's our DDL commands, and it talks about this. And oh, what do you know? DML, DCL, and TCL, right? So those should give you some pretty good ideas as to how to go about reading and studying for the finals. Update statements, insert statements, delete statements, truncate statements. Know the difference between a delete and a truncate. And not only for the final, but that's a question that I ask in every interview I've ever done. What's the difference between delete and truncate? Because it's a big difference and a very important one. Create statements, drop statements, alter statements, know tables and the different components of tables, know sequences and how those work. And these are all things that you've seen in labs, right? There's really nothing new here that we haven't done in a lab. So it'll be nice as you read this, you'll think back on labs and be like, oh yeah, I remember that. And that's really what we want, because that's tying in your actionable memory with your reading memory. And then we have our transactions, which we've done before. We talk about our save points, like saving in a video game, committing, or we can roll back to a save point. Know all your joins. And for this, I would just commit to memory your Venn diagrams, your circles. I've shown this multiple times in class, but if you just do an image search for SQL joins, I would keep this handy. This makes a world of difference. If we're doing a join between A is contact and B is telephone, and it's an inner join, we're only getting the ones that have a match between the two. If it's a left join, we get everybody, whether or not they have a telephone. Makes it nice and easy. Okay, and then you'll want to know the difference between the ANSI 92 and 89 versions, and we covered that very particularly in the week 5 video. So I said see the week 5 video because we covered that pretty good. Union, intersect, minus. Minus is probably the one thing we don't do in the lab. I don't know if we do intersect either. But real quick, just as a quick explanation, you'll notice that when we're doing a join, it's horizontal, right? Meaning we have a table here. We want to glue data onto the side of that. We want to add to the row where if we want to do a union, an intersect, or a minus, that deals vertically. Let's see if there's any good example here. Yeah, so here's a decent example. Basically, we're adding to a list, not gluing on this side, if that makes sense. And I believe over here, let's just do a search for union. Oh, right here. So we can see how the union works. Okay, there we are. And so the union adds, intersect is, so if I have a list, here's a good example. If I have a list of all the students in the CIT major, right? And I want to know, how many of those students have taken CIT225 and the web development course. Let's say that we're looking for potential candidates to help us build a new BYU Idaho website. Well, I have a list of all the students that have taken CIT225. I take all the list of the kids who've taken CIT web development class, and then I can do an intersect and find the ones that are in both lists. A minus does the opposite of a union. So let's say I want to find all the students who haven't taken CIT 225 that are CIT majors. So I would take all the students that are CIT 225, I would take that list, and then I would minus the students who have taken CIT 225, and that would leave me with the students who have not taken CIT 225. And there should be an example of that here as well. You'll want to know your various types of subqueries, the definitions of those: single row subquery, multiple row subquery, scalar subquery, and correlated subquery. And then you'll want to know just a little bit about the grant and the basic permissions. All right, does anyone have any questions about the study guide? Okay, pretty quiet. So I'm going to take that as a good sign. So what I would do this week is, if you get the labs done, obviously, and then I would start working on this sheet, and as you're doing it, obviously, we don't really care so much about, I'm not going to have you turn in your study guide. So this is just for your benefit. So what I would do is do whatever it is that helps you study. And that's kind of what this for is. I kind of tried to give you a comprehensive list of items to know. So, use this in whatever way you will to study. And so when will the final be available? I'm going to make it available starting on Wednesday of this week. So if you want to take it early, you're more than welcome to do so. Just know that I cannot grant retakes on the finals. So, take it when you're ready. Unless there's some extreme extenuating circumstance. Like I did have one student that the internet went out, and it was very easy to tell because I can see how much time you've spent in there. So I could easily see, I was in the final and power went out and he was like 3 questions in and only spent like 5 minutes. So there is a time limit. I think it's quite a decent chunk of time though. The last day of class, I believe, I'd have to look it up. Marion, look it up. I believe it's next. I believe it's the 8th. Let's see, today's this. What's today? 30th? No. March 31st. Oh, I'm in the wrong month. There we go. I was really confused there for a minute. Okay, so there's that week 13, week 14. I want to say it's the 14th. Let me double check though. Yeah, so the finals are open book, open note, open internet even. Realistically, the way this test was designed, it's I'm not going to say really hard. It's complicated, but the way it's designed is it's designed to really kind of test your knowledge, like the query exam. You kind of got to read it and know. It's actually a really good gauge of where you're at. It's not too difficult. And just so you know, I do grade it on a curve. and don't take that bad. It's not like I give out so many F's, so many A's, and all that. I don't do that. Basically, I have a set goal for the class average. So if everybody does poorly, I'm basically going to fluctuate up to meet that goal if it's not met. If everyone does extremely well, which honestly lately has been the case, then I just leave it. However, if everyone does poorly, like if the class average is like a 60%, then we raise that. That's kind of the way that works. How many questions? I believe that there is 30 questions. It should say on Canvas. Let me pull up this deadline before I get sidetracked. Focus on one thing.
I thought it said there were 50 and there were like 3 points each or something. It was worth 150 points.
Yeah, that sounds right. I couldn't remember if it was 30, 50, or 60.
Hey, can I ask a question on that page you're showing right there on your screenshot, that select C dot first name, blah, blah, blah. From contact, shouldn't that say from contact space C? Don't we need an alias there for that?
Oh, yep. Yeah, that's right. So,
okay, that made me feel better.
Yep.
No, I was freaking out.
That's a good eye. So, because this is the kind of stuff it's going to throw at you. So that is a really good eye. Good prep. Because it would fail. So you would want to, this would actually be, does it work? No. And it fails to resolve the first name column because of that alias. So good eye. Okay, so this says that the semester officially ends on the 9th. So it's the Monday after next week. So that's when it officially ends. So I would say you definitely want to have your test done by Friday of next week.
You're in March. That calendar's March.
Oh. Again. Okay, so the 9th, it's the Thursday. So that's actually next week on Thursday.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Good questions, good questions. And I'm glad you guys are keeping me on track. All right. And I almost want to say that they extended the deadline. I'll put out a note on some schedule stuff if it's not the official dates. Because I remember seeing one that they had extended stuff. But I'll still open up everything according to plan because I know a lot of you guys probably just want to be done. So anyways, great questions. Any other questions before we go? Alrighty, well, sounds like that's good. So I think we're good. So thanks everybody for coming. Hope everything goes well. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to update those instructions here in just a second. And yeah, we should be all set. So thanks for coming.